Dean Rohrs, Dean, her husband, Rhino, and their 3 children emigrated to Canada from South Africa 22 years ago. Dean grew up in Zambia, and after marrying Rhino, lived in Malawi, Namibia, and South Africa. Dean was born into a Rotary family, and when Rhino joined Rotary in 1986, became an active Rotary-Ann until she became a Rotarian in District 9300 in 1989. On arriving in Vancouver, both Dean and Rhino joined the Rotary Club of West Vancouver, and at present are members of the Rotary Club of Langley Central District 50/50. Dean has had a varied career from the early days of being an operating room nurse on Professor Christian Barnard's first heart transplant team to running a nursery school in Malawi. Together with Rhino, they now own or manage a company that is involved in soil stabilization during road construction. 8 years ago, Dean realized a lifelong ambition by receiving her qualifications in game guiding and game management. This culminated in a practical course which required her to become very familiar with the Big Five. She's an accomplished artist and professional ceramicist, try saying that, and both she and Rhino have a passion for the wilderness and traveling to unspoiled places. Dean has served on many district and zone committees and is presently regional coordinator for the Rotary Foundation. However, her best experience is leading teams of Rotarians, Rotaractors, and Interactors to South Africa and seeing how this volunteer experience changes their lives. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dean Rohrs.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's really such an honor and a privilege to be here, and this always gets me when I see myself right in front of me and I'm indicating it and doing my things. This presentation is actually not an easy one to give. It took a lot of soul searching to actually put it down on paper. I was asked to do so by one of our directors for a Zone Institute meeting. I actually sat down with my family and I said to them, you know, to write this story, which is so personal, it's me, it's who I am, is, you know, I'm exposing myself to the world and especially to the Rotary world. And my kids actually said to me, yes, Mum, it's about time you got rid of it, then you might be normal again. So this is my personal Rotary story. Every one of you here sitting has a Rotary story to tell. Here, as you sit in this room, every one of you bears a scar. These can be physical ones that you bear with pride, and then there are those emotional ones that we only face when our minds turn inwards. These can be small, or they can be deep scars that will still fester because we do not have the ability or the courage to face. Scars that perhaps should never have been formed, and scars that we promise ourselves our children will never form. Scars we bear come both from the living and from being touched by death. Our personal journey and the scars that we form come from many areas. Our circumstance of birth, our culture, both within and without, outside of our families, our relationships, our education, and our personal choices. Now, I was born into one of those very privileged white Afrikaner families in South Africa, and my forefathers are intertwined with the history of the colonization of that area and the power of the Dutch Reformed Church and the establishment of the Afrikanerdom. I grew up in a family and a church and a community that not only accepted the premise that all races other than white were inferior and subservient, but that it was our mission from God to keep it that way. And today, this is not only a scar that I bear on my psyche, but this is a scar on the world that allowed this to happen. So my dad went off and he fought the big battle in World War II, and he came home with some questions and a softening of this hard attitude. And soon after that, he was transferred to Zambia. And I grew up in Zambia, wild and free, in the most incredible place in the world to have spent a childhood. But the world soon forced itself onto my conscience. Revolution came to the then Belgian Congo, and our town was only 15 miles away from the border, and my mom was head of the Red Cross. So she was in charge of evacuating the refugees as they fled from the revolution that happened. I spoke French in those days, so there I was with my little clipboard, and I would meet the planes as they landed at the airport, bringing in the refugees from Kinshasa, or what was then called Elizabethville. And there was this one day, I went up the stairs, and the plane door opened, and there I stood with my little clipboard to take how many passengers came off the flight. And my world fell apart. This was a plane load of more than 30 Catholic nuns from one of the big convents from outside of Elizabethville, who had been raided by the rebels. And these amazing women had been raped. And then, as was the tradition with the revolutionaries, they had had their hands cut off. I remember standing at the door of the plane, the smell, the soft moans, and the prayers, and my world fell apart. I was 15 years old. Perhaps my first real scar and that screaming question, why? But life goes on. You bury it somewhere in your soul. The memories and the scars really never go away. You just learn to live with them. Soon after that, I left for South Africa to go to university, to the University of the Witwatersrand. And these were unsettled times, with South Africa becoming a republic and moving further and further into the depths of apartheid. This was the decade of defiance. Demonstrations by the depressed, the charismatic leaders such as Walter Sisulu and Nelson Mandela, defying the world. And I suddenly could find voice for my thoughts and my questions. So I joined the African National Congress, a banned political revolutionary organization, and I joyously stepped into the demonstrations against the oppressive apartheid regime, and straight into the cudgel of a white policeman. How dare I, as a white South African, demonstrate against the government? I remember that burning feeling of righteousness, the anger, the adrenaline rush, and the brick wall of reality when my body hit the bare cement floor of the women's prison in the old fort. My hands handcuffed behind my back, the cold of that bare cement floor, and the quiet of those around me, and the fear came rushing in. Fear so great that I cannot describe it. And remember, I was of the privileged white race in South Africa. They kept us there for a week to teach us a lesson, and really, I don't want to think back on those memories. It was really not a good time. And I was 17 years old, and I carry that scar to this day. Now, 5 years ago, I took this wonderful team of students from the Hugh Boyd School in Richmond in British Columbia to South Africa. And our wonderful Rotarians hosts took us on a tour of Constitution Hill, where the Court for Truth and Reconciliation now stands. So driving up that hill to our destination, I was so excited to be going to such a symbol of change. But suddenly I could feel the hair on the back of my neck rising up. I could feel the cold of a concrete floor, and I could feel this uncontrollable fear starting to rise within my soul, as I recognized that today I had to face my past and the fears that still rise in my soul, because Constitution Hill, now the symbol of change and promise, was built on the horrors of the old fort. So more than 50 years to my last footsteps on that hill, I joined the students on the tour, starting with the men's prison. And once again, my world fell apart. I had heard many stories from my ANC friends. I had read many reports. I knew that horrors beyond description had been perpetrated in those ghastly dungeons, but I'd never ever allowed myself to face that reality, to actually see that whipping rack where men were tied to while they received the punishment delivered by order of a court. 50 lashes, because you did not have your dompas or ID documents with you. 50 lashes as they were tied to this medieval rack and whipped with a whip that comes straight out of hell. And I had ignored it. I had not done anything about it. So I cannot describe to you the shame that I felt that day or the burning of the scars that I carry, scars so small compared to so many other South Africans. I could not face the women's prison, and my courage failed me, so I went and sat in the bus and I waited for the students to finish their tour and join me. However, my catharsis came with sharing the story and my feelings with these young folks. And the students and I talked much about the past, about injustice, about inequality, and I have a very clear understanding that they will do all in their power to work to a peaceful world, a world where men do not get tied to whipping racks, where children do not form scars. So Rotary has been my solace and the vehicle that has allowed me to heal many of my scars. The magic of Rotary allows ordinary people like us to accomplish extraordinary things. Our service not only transforms others' lives, but is itself a life-changing experience for us as well. Through Rotary, we become a part of something larger than ourselves, and we make Rotary greater than the sum of its parts. So you heard that I had this dream of becoming this African game ranger, and this was a dream that I had when I was finishing school. But life, much as it is in many parts of the world, kind of didn't allow women to do those sort of things. So I couldn't fulfill that dream at that stage. But I made myself a promise that one day before I died, this is what I would do. So for my 60th birthday, I gave myself this gift, and I did my degree in nature conservation and wildlife management, and I took myself off to Africa to do the practical. So here I am, this old dame, with all these young people on this very, very physical course. It was one of the hardest things that I have ever done in my life. However, today, and I was there again late last year, and the stories still are going around of this crazy old woman who used to run around in her nightie chasing the buffalo because they used to keep her awake at night. So yes, I did leave my mark on that part of the world. So I did my eco training in northern South Africa in the Sami Sands Private Game Reserve. And it was this experience that made me come to terms with the impossible dreams of the youth living in impossible circumstances. Youth that bear scars, many that could have been prevented. It was this experience that really turned me into a passionate Rotarian and to take action. Early one morning, we drove out of the game reserve to assist one of our ladies who was looking after us in our camp to drop off her children as they had to return to the village to go back to school. This was a young girl of 9 and a boy of 7, and they were left sitting under a tree on the side of a dirt road waiting for their ride to pick them up. You know, as we drove away, I saw the tears running down her face, and you ask a question without thinking. And I said to her, "Are you sad? Are you crying because you're sad that you will not be seeing your children for a while?" And she said to me, "Yes, of course I'm sad that I won't be seeing my children, but I'm also deadly afraid." In this community, there's a belief that if a man has sex with an underage girl, he will be protected from AIDS. And I do not know if my daughter will be safe. I was stunned. It was like a fist right between my eyes. Oh, God, please keep her safe. Oh, God, what do I do? And I had no answers. I really didn't know. And then I had the opportunity to visit the village a few days later, and I asked the chief if this belief was true. Yes, he said, although this is what we believe, perhaps it's not true. We need to be told. I asked him, so, okay, how do I tell the story of the truth of AIDS? And these were his words. The lifeblood of our villages lie with our children, and we must feed them. Not only food, but education. What we need is education. Education to change the beliefs and cultures, education to make things right. You know, you go back, and I tossed and turned in my little safari bed in my little tent with my buffalo outside. And I thought about this. What can I do? What can I do? One person who lives in Canada. And you know, my mum read a poem to me which has stuck in my soul, because my mum worked a lot with children. We are guilty of many errors and faults, but our worst crime is abandoning the children, neglecting this fountain of life. Many of the things that we need can wait, but the children cannot. Right now, their bones are being formed, their blood is being made, and their senses are being developed. To them, we cannot answer tomorrow. Their name is today. And I guess it was then that I understood. I am a member of a Rotary club. I'm a member of this powerful organization. And I started a journey that turned me from being just a member of a Rotary club into a passionate Rotarian. Now, the passion came very quickly, but the knowledge and understanding of how Rotary worked, the putting into place of the projects, the motivation of fellow Rotarians, and the training I needed, this took a little longer. However, over the past 10 years, together with Rotary, we've done many projects, some of which have resulted in the building now of 8 nursery schools in these tiny little villages. We now feed over 1,000 children a day, and we have helped these communities take that first step on this journey to break the cycle of poverty and to feed their children. Now, I spoke to you about that team of students I took to South Africa 5 years ago. And on that very last day that we spent in one of these tiny little villages, this is one I will never forget. We went to the little school in Thorndale, which is the school of my heart, to say goodbye. And the children sang and danced for us, and then they did this little play. And I give you the words of this play verbatim because they are burnt into my soul. The name of the play is The AIDS is Coming. Now, please remember, these are 5 children under the age of 7 that are doing this little play. AIDS is a killer. No, AIDS is not a killer. You can wear a condom. Come, let's go to the doctor to get tested. So one child holds out the arm, the doctor and an assistant try and, pretend to be taking blood. They turn around, test the blood, turn back to the child and say, so sorry, you are positive. The child pretends, bursts into tears, and the others comfort her and say to her, don't worry, let's go shopping and buy your drugs. Well, when the play was over, I saw the shocked expression on the faces of my students, but part of their shock was my reaction, because I was joyously crying and laughing and cheering, and my happiness was because of a picture from 10 years ago of 2 little children sitting under a tree, and a mother's tears of fear because of a belief prevalent in those communities that if a man had sex with a young virgin, they were protected from AIDS. And here today was proof that the journey started that day had ended in the education of a community. The story had come full circle because of Rotary, and there were less scars to form on these children. Now, last year, again, visiting the same school. They performed the same little play, but this time there was a new scene. This time it's a little girl, about 5 years old, and she was all dressed in pink, and she had her little hair up in these funny little bunches, and she stood there and she said, "Don't touch my body. My body is a temple to God. You do not have permission to touch my body. Don't touch my body." Young girls being empowered. These are young girls being taught less and less scars to develop. Now, in Johannesburg, through Rotary, I work with an organization called Refilwe. This center services those horrendous squatter camps that lie close to the edge of Johannesburg. They're called informal settlements, but really they are these horrendous squatter camps. The names of these camps resonate through the revolutionary history of South Africa: Alexandria, Diepsloot, Zandspruit, Eskom. This is nearly 1 million people living in the most abominable conditions. There's no electricity, there's no sanitation, there's no water. Nelson Mandela promised everybody a toilet, so they do have one pit toilet in the back. And this is usually for a family of 16, 18, 20 people living in these tiny, tiny little shacks built out of anything that they could find. On this particular day, I had a young girl come running up to me, and she thrust this brand new baby in my arms, and she said, "Please, will you take my baby? Take my baby and make him yours." And I said to her, "Why? Why would you give me your baby?" And she said, "I'm 14 years old. I have no education. I'm a prostitute. I'm HIV positive. What future is there for my child?" You know, your heart breaks. What do you do? But the social workers from Refilwe scooped her up, and she now lives in a home with foster parents, and she goes to school. She has the medical treatment that she needs, and her baby is cared for. So every year when I go back to Refilwe, I go and visit Elizabeth and her baby and just see this amazing advantage that they have. But what about all the others? What about all those young girls who didn't have the courage to speak up, the ones that have to bear the scars? Now, together with Rotarians from the Rotary Club of Randburg, we went deep into Alexandria Township, and this is an area that I would never, ever have dared to put my foot as a white person in the years past. We arrived at this primary school. No playgrounds, no garden, this ugly, ugly brick building and a very small brick courtyard. And there were hundreds and hundreds of these wonderful kids running around, laughing, playing, smiling, and not showing the scars that they absolutely have to bear. You know, these are schools where in first grade class, there are more than 80 children sitting together with one teacher in a room that is so small that if a child has to go to the washroom, the other kids have to slide out of the bench to allow that child out. We were met by the headmistress, and I could see that she was in a very agitated state. So I said to her, "Look, we'll come back on another day." And she said, No, it's good. It's good that you are here, that you can see what we have to face in our community. Now, that morning, that school had had assembly. And as African children do, they squat down on their heels. And as the headmistress standing in front of the class, the first grade class in front of her, going up to the higher grades, she had identified 2 little girls sitting in front of her who had obviously been sexually abused or raped by the evidence on their underwear. And this was her emotional state. As she said to us, what does she now do? She has no help for these children. She has no help for these families. And once again, Rotary stepped in. The Rotary Club of Randburg now financed a social worker to work permanently within that school and to help all the children that have been abused or need the psychological support. So I have to think about the scars, not only of those little girls, but I have to think of the scars formed on that headmistress and the burden that she bears on a daily basis. Now I'm going to tell you a very personal story. And I hesitated to put this into the presentation, but again my family said, it does. It explains who you are, Mom, so talk about it. It was about 5 years ago when my phone rang, and it was a cousin of mine, a very special cousin, and her name is Ria. And Ria said to me, Dean, please can you come? I need you. My husband, Don, has been shot and killed. Now, there are very few families in South Africa that are not affected by some form of violence, and I'm talking about every race in South Africa. Violence is so prevalent. Families are not protected from this. Anyway, I flew to Johannesburg, and I got there by the weekend. And what had actually happened was Ria's a medical doctor, and Don was a veterinary doctor, and they had their practices on a very large acreage, sort of in one of the main suburbs in Johannesburg. And 10 a.m. in the morning, 3 guys had just walked into that surgery and shot Don execution style. Ria had heard the shots, and she ran, and Don died in her arms. On Monday morning, the phone rang, and it was the police saying, oh, you know, we've done everything. We are now releasing the crime scene, and you can clean up. Okay, who cleans up? There's no cleaning services in South Africa. You can't pick up the phone and phone somebody and come and say, clean up this crime scene. You can't ask the family. Who cleans up? I cleaned up. On my hands and knees that day, on that floor, washing Don's blood off those walls and off the furniture. I had a hatred within me that I cannot describe. A hatred for man, a hatred for man's inhumanity to man, a hatred for what the world does to people. So flying back to Canada, these thoughts were in my mind, and I realized I cannot live with this hatred. I have to let it go somehow or other. But I needed an understanding. And the reality is that there really is no answer as to why this happens. We scar people so easily, and when these scars affect or divert what we consider to be normal behavior, who's to blame? All that I know for absolute certainty is that we must do something, and we can, and that Rotary is there with its striving to bring peace and human understanding to all. So today I have kind of shared with you some of my life story, and you've seen my scars. But despite the sadness I have faced in my life, it has also been full of light, happiness, and adventure. And it's both the light and the darkness that make me the person I am today. I think of the joy of the experience of the national immunization days I did in India, and now last November in Nigeria, of giving those drops 10 solid days of immunizing in the back streets in the northern part of Nigeria, in the little villages, working with those children, working with the people, the sheer joy and the pleasure that came from that. That is the light that Rotary brings into our lives as well. But perhaps there's one quote from Nelson Mandela that really resonates with me, and it's the following. I have walked the long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter. I have made missteps along the way, but I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. I have taken a moment here to rest, to steal a view of the glorious vista that surrounds me, to look back on the distance that I have come. But I can only rest a moment, for with freedom comes responsibilities, and I dare not linger, for my long walk is not ended. This truly is what Rotary is all about. Our walk to bring peace and equality to this world is never over until the job is done. Our task to eradicate polio is never done until the polio virus no longer exists on this earth. In the preface to The End of Poverty, Bono from the band U2 writes, "We can be that generation that no longer accepts that an accident of latitude determines whether a child lives or dies. But will we be that generation? Will we in the West realize our potential, or will we sleep in the comfort of our affluence with apathy and indifference murmuring softly in our ears? 15,000 people dying needlessly every day from things like AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, dysentery. These are the mothers, the fathers, the teachers, the farmers, and especially the children. This is Africa's crisis, that it's not on our nightly news, that we do not treat this as an emergency. This is our crisis. And I think that Bono hits the nail on the head, this terrible gap between what we can do and what we will do. In my view, that's the greatest gap, the most critical gap in our world. It's greater than the generational gap, the digital divide, or even the gap between the rich and the poor. The most important gap in this world is the gap between what we now have the ability, the potential, and the resources to do, and what we actually do. I think more of this one line by Henry David Thoreau than I think of any other line in anything that I have read. Thoreau writes, "The mass of humanity goes to its grave with its songs still in them." Now each of us has a song that no one else has. Our one vocation, regardless of our creed or calling, is to sing our song. And the greatest tragedies of all can only be that the mass of humanity goes to its grave with their songs still in them. I hope now that you will remember this line and that you will sing your song. We know that Rotary already sings, but now we need to sing our songs of peace to all those communities that we touch on a daily basis, our neighborhoods, our circles of influence. Singing our song or walking our road to freedom ultimately is what makes us an effective human being. So together with Rotary, we need to be there to offer the children the opportunities and to guide them along their freedom walk so that they can join in a chorus of opportunity to sing their songs and have their dreams come true. There should be no reason why any child should have to walk with scars. It's up to us to give service above self, and in doing so, bring to the world what it really needs, peace. Now may you all walk in peace as you go forward with Rotary. Thank you.